you're even a little bit like me, then you will love this video, as it is spooky book recommendations perfect for this fall season. So hello my fellow fantasy book lovers, and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, hi and welcome. My name is Kathy and I'm a fantasy book lover from Belgium. In today's video, I want to give you a few book recommendations that are spooky book recommendations for this fall. Before I get into the actual recommendations, there's two honorable mentions, and the main reason is that I mentioned them too much. First of all, Empire of the Vampire by J. Christoph. Dark, doom and gloom vampires, very much sarcasm, a little bit of sexual content in it as well. It's a very dark and gory book series, but I love it. And if you like fantasy romance with vampires, then I would highly recommend checking out Carissa Broadbent's Crimes of Nyaxia series. But now let's get into the actual list of books that I want to recommend for this video. Up first, we're starting with a standalone novel, When Among Crows. And this is a very short read, so even if you don't read very fast or you don't have a lot of time to read, this would be one of the books that I highly recommend. In When Among Crows, we follow our main character, who is this type of monster hunter. We will get more explanations on what he actually is deeper into the book, but he decides that he wants to redeem himself somehow, and he wants to help out one of the creatures that he designs, Monster, which is a sort of witch. And he actually goes and at the beginning of the book gets this special ingredient that is only available like once a year, and he gets that to said witch to help her cure. So this book, even if it is short, has a lot of fantastic creatures in it. It is an urban fantasy, but still very fantasy vibes, and it was just so intriguing and weird, and I just loved this. So if you want to pick one of the books from this entire pile that I will recommend to you, I would think this one is a very good starting point. After that, I want to recommend a more YA book, and this is Bitterthorn by Kat Dunn. In this book, there is a village, and around the village is a forest, and in that forest lives a witch in a castle. And every more or less 50 years, that witch comes to the village and takes one person as a sacrifice. And in this book, of course, is when the witch requires a new sacrifice. And the other main character of this book is the daughter of like the lord of this area. And she actually doesn't feel welcome in their family. Her mother has passed away, so she's now one of the children with her father and her stepmother. Her stepmother has two of her own daughters, so it's a little bit of Cinderella vibes, and they don't like the main character. So whenever the witch comes to the town, she actually sacrifices herself to go with the witch. And that's where the book actually takes off and becomes super interesting, because she starts exploring this big castle in which the witch lives all by herself. And there is one tower she's not allowed to go in. Of course, she starts venturing there eventually, and she discovers all of these things about the past people that lived with the witch and why she needs someone every 50 years. I really love this book. It is a little bit romantical, but there is nothing actually happening in the book, like a little bit kiss here and there, but no actual sexual content, which is very nice. So this is definitely a YA fantasy, and I really loved the sacrifice, but then finding more meaning than just sacrificing herself. And yeah, I just thought this was a beautiful book. Up next, another dark fairy tale. This is Tornage by T. Kingfisher. Honestly, I could pick up any T. Kingfisher book. I also have Nettle and Bone. They're all dark twists on fairy tales. So in Tornage, what I really loved is this is a take on Sleeping Beauty. So you have the castle with the tower with a girl locked into it who is sleeping. And in this book, the person locked in the tower might not be as innocent as it first appears to be. So we follow Toadling as they try to protect this tower from people trying to liberate the person in the tower or the creature in the tower. And they actually sacrifice their entire life to this tower and to the protection of it. And of course, a knight comes and they try to talk to that knight, talk them out of actually going to the tower, etc. So I really loved this different take from an external point of view on Sleeping Beauty and not the Sleeping Beauty point of view. So I think this was really well written, really cleverly written, but do know this is a dark fairy tale. So not everything is as nice and as fluffy as it was in the Disney movies. Also from T. Kingfisher, there's of course Nettle and Bone. In Nettle and Bone, we follow Mia, who is the third daughter of a sort of regent of a region, and they want to marry one of their daughters to the prince of this bigger kingdom. The first daughter in line goes, but she passes away and they're not really clear on what is actually happening. So they end up having to send their second daughter as well. And to protect their third daughter, they actually send her to a sort of monastery. So she is like out of his reach. Now, this second daughter becomes the wife of this prince. She actually gets children. And whenever the family actually goes to visit her, they see that the prince is actually mistreating her. So Mara decides that she wants to find a solution to liberate her sister, and she goes to a grave witch. This grave witch gives her a few seemingly impossible tasks, and Mara sets out to try and complete this task so she can actually get the help of the grave witch to find a solution for the evil prince. So that's what this book is about. It has very much adventure vibes. At the beginning, it jumps in the time a little bit, and I found it a bit confusing. It wasn't always very clear why and where we were. So we start at the middle of one of the things she needs to do, and then we jump back to the beginning of what is actually going on. Nonetheless, I really loved the dark, spooky vibes of this like dark fairy tale retelling, so I could highly recommend it to you. Unavoidably, there's also a bunch of vampire-themed books in this recommendation list, and we're gonna, of course, start with the book that started it all for me. This is the original Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is actually my English copy that I've read a lot of times. This was only €2, even that's how easy it is to find. Yeah, Dracula is the original Dracula story. I really love the you don't really know what's happening vibe that is going on. It is very psychological, dark. So if you haven't read the original Dracula yet, then I could highly recommend doing so. Following on Dracula is, of course, A Dowry of Blood. This talks about one of the first wives of Dracula. This is her story. The name Dracula is actually never mentioned in this book, and it is written as a form of therapy for his first wife to process everything that's happened ever since she met Dracula and got turned by him and actually became one of his brides, and also everything that happens afterwards. This book is very heavy. It talks about heavy themes such as abuse, cheating, open relationships in a way that isn't exactly consensual. So this is a book that talks about trauma a lot. I personally really liked it. I have personally also gone through some not so nice times in the past, and it helped me like know that I'm not alone in it, and this book was really powerful in that. However, if that's a topic that you're sensitive to, then I would not recommend reading this book, but I personally really loved A Dowry of Blood. Let's get on the lighter vampire reads with My Roommate is a Vampire. This isn't exactly a doom and gloom spooky vibe, but I feel like not everyone wants too heavy of a theme, so this one is a spooky read, but a spooky fun read. We have this vampire that is reawakening after X amount of years of slumber, and he has an apartment in which he has a room free that he wants to rent out, and he is renting it out for way too cheap. The female main character is a younger girl. She is living in an apartment that isn't in the best condition. Her mom is ill, so she's trying to cover those costs as well with her job, but it is a lot of money. So she finds this listing for a very cheap apartment. She applies for it. It seems too good to be true, but still she moves in there, and that is the basic premises of this book. Now, you do know that the main character is a vampire. He has a few quirks of itself. I just thought this was so funny and such a light read, and it's a spooky vibe without being too heavy. So I really enjoyed this book. Up next, another vampire and witches themed book. In the Revenant games, you actually have a village that is in between two bigger settlements. One of the vampires, one of the witches, and in between is a forest. And at the middle of that forest is where the humans are allowed to go and like gather things like plants and mushrooms and hunt, etc. However, if they venture too much to the vampire side, the vampires might kill them, and if they venture too towards the witch's side too much, they might capture them and kill them as well. So Bly and her sister one day venture into this forest, go too far towards one side, and she eats something that has been poisoned by the witches, and her sister passes away and is taken away by witches. And once a year there is a sort of contest which is called the Revenant Games, in which every human can participate. The basic setup is that as a human you go to the vampires, you get an alliance with one of them, and in exchange you will capture a witch and deliver them to the vampires, and vice versa. And what you can win if you do this with the vampires is to become immortal, become a vampire basically, and if you win it on the witch's side, then you will get someone who is dead brought back to life. So the Revenant Games basically. And of course Bly, the main character, starts in that competition, but not everything goes as planned. And yeah, I really did enjoy this book. It wasn't my favorite read ever because the main character was a little bit annoying to me, but I did like the basic setup of it. And at the end the plot twist happens, so there is a book 2. So if you do enjoy it, then there is a book 2 in this series as well. If your question is how many vampire books is she still gonna recommend, the answer is 2. And the next one is An Education in Malice. This book follows Laura, Sheridan and Carmilla, and they're academic rivals in this poetry class with their teacher De La Fontaine. And Laura Sheridan is the new arrival, Carmilla is the established teacher's pet, teacher's favorite, whatever. But then the teacher also starts to include Laura Sheridan as well as Carmilla. A sort of romantic relationship starts to bloom between Laura Sheridan and Carmilla, and then they notice something weird is going on with their teacher that they're not always as aware of. I at first did not know that this book included vampires, that's how well written it was, but if you know it, you will know it from the start. I loved this book. It's very dark doom and gloom academic vibes, so if you like dark academia you will enjoy this book. If you like vampires you will also enjoy this book, I think. And what I also enjoyed about this book is that it wasn't too fast-paced. It's not like a million things are happening at the same time. You really get that dark academia feeling from it. And then the last vampire book for this video is The Scarlet Veil. In this book we follow our female main character Celie. She is part of a group called Les Chasseurs, so the hunters, and they actually hunt all evil creatures basically. So they don't really define it as being like witches and warlocks, but there are some magical powers within her friend group as well. But Celie actually has a darker past. She actually sacrificed herself to kill this super powerful witch years ago because that witch kidnapped her sister. Her sister unfortunately didn't survive it. But ever since she has this like dark past that is kind of following her. The partner she has in this book is actually the head of Les Chasseurs, so the hunters, and he's trying to overprotect her. That's very much the vibe we get from it. However, Celie is really trying to prove herself to be an asset to this team of hunters, but she's constantly like pushed back, withheld information, etc. So at some point in this book something happens and she gets taken away to vampires, and that's where for me the best parts of this book come, because there's so much happening with these vampires. We also get pulled back a little bit into the history of the main character, and yeah, I really loved it. This is the first part in what I think is either a duology or the start of a series, but there will definitely be another book after this one. For me, this was a fast read because it is technically, I think, a YA fantasy book. It does have some like more intimate interactions, but not explicit sexual content. So in this book, it is not purely vampire based, but there's vampires, there's ghosts, there are witches, there's magic happening, so there is a lot of those elements that I personally really enjoy in spooky season. The final 2 recommendations that I have are a little bit at opposite ends of what I consider spooky reads. The second to last recommendation is Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. If you like a little bit spooky vibes, but you don't want it to be too much, then this is perfect. This is actually a children's book, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed it. We basically have this child whose family is murdered and they live close to a graveyard. The child ventures into this graveyard and is raised by the ghosts on the graveyard. That is the basic setup for this book. It's really kind of spooky. It is fun. It's not too heavy, but not too light. It is written as a children's book, of course. So know that this is not like the most difficult read, but I really enjoyed it. And if you're looking for that spooky vibe, but you're not into doom and gloom and gore, then this would be perfect for you. And then finally, for the people who do love gore, someone you can build a nest in. This book was totally not what the cover anticipates it to be. If you look at the cover this way, it looks like, oh, magical fantasy forest. Well, no. Well, kind of yes and no. In this book, we follow the creature Secession as she lives in this abandoned castle type situation in the forest. And whenever she goes into a slumber, she disintegrates. And then when she wakes up again, she's actually being hunted because she's a monster. She absorbs parts of flesh and bits and everything. And I personally didn't really enjoy that aspect of the book. There is a little bit of romance, there is a little bit of like the village versus the monster vibe. You also notice that the monster isn't totally evil. So it has this very much witch hunt, monster hunt vibes. I liked this book, but I didn't love this book. But if you like gory details, then you might actually love this book. So these were some of my spooky book recommendations for this fall. I hope you find a few books that you would like to read from this video. And if you want to see more cozy fantasies that are perfect for fall, then of course feel free to watch this video. Of course, feel free to let me know more book recommendations in the comment section down below. I always love getting more recommendations based upon the books that I've already read, so feel free to do so in a comment down below. All of the books that I've mentioned are listed in the description box of this video. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up. And then of course, if you haven't already but you'd like to be, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I make new videos every week and I would love to have you for every single one of them. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!